All right, let's dive right in. Today we're talking about one of the most pivotal moments in all of modern history, the explosive, chaotic beginning of the First World War. We're going to find out how a single gunshot could possibly ignite a global conflict that would change our world forever.
In August of 1914, this was the promise the German Kaiser Wilhelm II made to his troops as they marched off. And that quote, it just perfectly captures the whole feeling at the time. All across Europe, everyone thought the same thing. This was going to be a short, glorious war. You know, a quick adventure, and then everyone comes home a hero.
Yeah, so about that glorious adventure, it turned into a 4-year nightmare. The Great War, as they called it then, lasted for 1,566 absolutely brutal days. And most of those young men who heard that promise, they would never see their homes again.
So the big question is, how? How does one shot in one city, Sarajevo, drag the entire planet into a catastrophe that reshapes empires and costs millions and millions of lives? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. Let's trace the path from that one fateful moment to a world at war.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this one incredibly dramatic event. It was a moment of violence that basically provided the perfect excuse for a war that, let's be honest, a lot of powerful empires had been waiting for.
So it's June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is visiting. First, an assassin throws a bomb at his car, but it bounces off and explodes under the car behind him. Shaken, but okay, the Archduke insists on finishing his duties and then visiting his wounded men in the hospital. And this is where things get just wild. It comes down to pure dumb luck. His driver, who doesn't know the new route, takes a wrong turn. He tries to reverse the car and it stalls. And by a 1 in a million chance, it stalls directly in front of another one of the assassins, a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip, who had totally given up and was just standing outside a cafe. Princip couldn't believe his eyes. He steps forward, fires 2 shots, and within minutes, both the Archduke and his wife Sophie are dead.
So who was this kid, Gavrilo Princip? Well, he was part of a secret society of Serbian nationalists called the Black Hand. Their whole goal was to create a greater Serbia. And to do that, they needed to liberate lands they believed were Serbian, but which were controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And get this, they even had some backing from inside the Serbian government. So for them, the Archduke's visit was the perfect chance to make a very violent statement.
For the Austro-Hungarian Empire, this wasn't just some murder. Oh no. This was an attack on the heir, on the monarchy, on the empire itself. It was basically an act of war. You can see it in their propaganda posters from the time. This one shows Austria crushing a snake-like Serbia. The message couldn't be clearer. Serbia must die.
But here's the problem. Austria-Hungary couldn't just roll in and crush Serbia. Because Europe in 1914, well, it was a powder keg wrapped in a super complicated web of military alliances. These were promises of mutual defense that meant one little conflict could instantly become a continent-wide inferno.
You basically had Europe split into 2 massive armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other side, you had the Triple Entente, that's France, Russia, and Great Britain. The key thing to understand is that an attack on one was basically an attack on all their friends. And you can just watch the dominoes fall one after another in a matter of days. First, Austria-Hungary gets a blank check of support from Germany, and they declare war on Serbia. Then Russia, who sees itself as the big protector of the Serbs, starts mobilizing its huge army. Now, Germany sees this as a direct threat, so boom, they declare war on Russia. Since France is Russia's ally, Germany declares war on them too, just to be safe. And to get to France quickly, they invade neutral Belgium. And that's the last straw for Great Britain, who had promised to protect Belgium, so they declare war on Germany. And just like that, in about a week, all of Europe is at war.
And you know what's kind of crazy? This was literally a family feud. The leaders of 3 of the biggest empires in this whole mess, King George of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas of Russia, were all first cousins. They were all Queen Victoria's grandkids. But by 1914, none of that mattered. The pressures of nationalism, those rigid military plans, years of rivalry, the machine of war was already rolling, and no amount of family ties could stop it.
Right, so remember that quote about being home by fall? Everybody thought this war was going to be a quick one. And Germany, well, they had a very specific plan to make sure of it.
Germany's biggest nightmare was having to fight a long war on 2 fronts at the same time, against France in the west and Russia in the east. So they came up with something called the Schlieffen Plan. The whole idea was pure speed. Instead of hitting France's super-fortified border, they would just sweep right through neutral Belgium, loop around Paris, and knock France out of the war in about 40 days. The thinking was they could do all that before the massive but very slow Russian army could even get its act together.
It was a bold plan, but it was also this super fragile clockwork thing where everything had to go perfectly. And as the German armies got closer and closer to Paris, it didn't. Let's look at how this whole ambitious plan started to fall apart.
So you've got these German armies. They're marching for weeks, totally exhausted. Communications are breaking down. And then it happens. A fatal mistake, a 50-kilometer gap, that's about 30 miles, opens up between their first and second armies. It was a massive weak spot. And thanks to brand new technology, reconnaissance airplanes, the French spotted it immediately.
So the French are scrambling. They need to hit that gap and launch a counterattack, and they need to do it now. And what they do next is just legendary. The military governor of Paris literally commandeered about 600 of the city's taxicabs. They packed thousands of soldiers into them and rushed them to the front line. The event became known as the Taxis of the Marne, and it's this incredible symbol of French resistance.
That counterattack at the Marne River worked. It halted the German advance. And what happens next is this crazy race to the sea, where both sides are trying to get around the other's flank, but nobody can land a knockout blow. So what's the result? A single, unbroken line of defensive trenches stretching 700 kilometers, that's over 400 miles, all the way from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea.
And right there, that was the moment. The dream of a quick war of movement, it was dead, gone. And what replaced it was a new kind of hell. Soldiers on both sides, totally exhausted, just started digging in for protection. At first, it was just little ditches, but soon they became deep, muddy, disease-ridden trenches protected by barbed wire. This wasn't temporary. This was the horrifying birth of trench warfare.
So while all this is happening, while the Western Front is getting stuck in the mud, the conflict is exploding everywhere else, turning it into a true world war.
Remember Germany's big gamble? That Russia would be slow to get ready? Well, they were wrong. Russia mobilized way faster than anyone expected. So while German armies were getting bogged down in France, Russian forces were already pouring into German territory in the east. Germany was now stuck fighting the exact two-front war it had gambled everything to avoid.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, in November of 1914, the Ottoman Empire jumps in on the side of the Central Powers. This opens up totally new battlefronts in the Middle East, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of the Caucasus. And just like that, the European war is officially a world war.
So think about it. We started with one shot, which lit a fuse that detonated an entire continent. The alliances, the war plans, this crazy belief in a short, heroic fight, it all led to this, a stalemate on an industrial scale. The quick, glorious war was a total fantasy. And the question that would haunt the world for the next 4 years was this: what happens now? What happens when millions of soldiers realize they're trapped in a new kind of hell, with no victory and no end in sight?